So let's go back all the way. How did you get started in BMX racing?
My mom found a flyer at the local bike shop advertising the local racing track. I was a 7-year-old kid. I was, doing what most 7-year-olds do. I was playing other sports, t-ball, soccer, that kind of stuff. And then I had just recently learned how to ride a bike. I was riding my bike around the neighborhood, jumping off curbs, doing the normal 7-year-old thing. My mom found a flyer, thought that maybe I would like it, and took me out to give it a try. And that was that.
I mean, at 7 years old, you're trying everything. So what was it about BMX that stuck with you?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to, go back to my 7-year-old mind and identify what exactly I liked. I think I liked the individual aspect of it. I was a hyper competitive kid. And so I didn't like it when I would be playing T-ball and some kids would just be picking daisies in the outfield. Or, we would be playing basketball and, everybody got to play the same amount of minutes. And so I would get taken out for somebody who I was clearly better than. And I don't think I like that. It's part of it. When you're a kid, you're playing sports supposed to be for fun, and then it gets more competitive as you get older. But I think I was just competitive right off the bat.
I think it's funny when I interview individual sport athletes versus team sport athletes. Like, y'all make yourselves very obvious. And like some people are just drawn to individual sports. And obviously, like when you're a kid, your parents put you in everything, you know? So
Mhm.
like they start you in swimming, which is an individual sport, or like soccer, which is a team sport, t-ball, like you were saying. And like they just kind of hopefully let your personality decide whether you want to be an individual sport or a team sport athlete.
Yeah, and I think I would have been fine in a team sport as we got older. Right? Like I don't think I would have any issues with being in a professional team sport where everybody's taking it seriously and working hard and dedicated. But I think when you're young, the disparity is so large between some kids taking it seriously and trying and other kids who were just there because their parents were making them be there, but they had no interest. And that was, I think, the issue that I had is I wanted to win, but a couple of the kids on the team didn't even want to be there, so they weren't trying.
I mean, did your family have any experience with competitive biking?
No, no, no. My dad played rugby, and my mom was an ice skater. So not even anything close. It was just we found that flyer. It was very random. Went out there and were kind of clueless, and had to rely on people to tell us what was going on, and then they just credit to them, they learned and they read magazines, read books. This is pre-internet. This is the 90s. So you couldn't just Google basics of BMX. So they were doing everything they could to learn, and also credit to them, they knew what they didn't know, so they were able to sign me up for classes or coaching or whatever, and allow people who really did know to help me.
I mean, you're what, 6 feet tall? Did I see on your bio? I
Yeah.
mean, does BMX have a height limit? I mean, I think
No,
that like,
I think that's one of the cool things about BMX is that there's athletes who have been successful that are all different shapes, sizes, and builds. So, as an example, the guy who won the bronze medal for Team USA in 2008 is 5'5". The guy who won the silver medal right in front of him is 6'3". So, almost a foot difference in height and, by 40, 50 pounds difference, but they got silver bronze at the Olympics. Over the past 10, 15 years, there is kind of a build that seems to be coming to the front, and that's more like the 5'10" to 6'1", lean, muscular build. But there are anomalies and people that are taller or shorter that have been able to make it work.
how do you train for BMX? And what percentage of that is physical versus mental?
The second question is a can of worms, because you could say it's 100% mental in a way, because you could be the strongest, fittest, fastest athlete, but if you can't perform under pressure, then it doesn't matter. Um, I would say though, at the highest level, when you're talking at the Olympic level, everybody has a base level that's pretty similar. Uh, Everybody is going to be within a range of a physical capability, and the mental is really the difference maker there between first place at the Olympics and fifth place at the Olympics. More than anything, is the mental side of things. Um, As far as training goes, it is a very difficult sport to train for because you have to have a lot of different pieces. So the races are 35 to 40 seconds long. So you need, and they're full out sprints. So you need the endurance of like a 400-meter sprinter. But when we're coming out of the starting line, we are pedaling the bikes to get them going. So you need the explosiveness out of the blocks of a 100-meter sprinter. And how you build that is by lifting weights. And so we need like Olympic lifting level explosive power and strength. Then you throw in the fact that you're jumping 50-foot jumps going 40 miles an hour next to 7 other athletes, and you're having to land on a tiny little piece of dirt. So you start throwing in like the coordination and the balance of like, say, a gymnast. And then like the last thing is like you're watching people get you know injured right in front of you, and it's a dangerous sport, and you've been injured, people are crashing, you got to get back up and keep going. So you got to kind of have the mentality of a fighter, and so you need a lot of different pieces to be successful. If you're missing one of those pieces, you can't do it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to your crash later, but I mean, I did watch it.
What'd you think?
Man, I mean, and then I found the litany of injuries that you sustained from it. I mean, you went down hard. And then you had done another podcast that I listened to a YouTube short of where you listed broken rib, collapsed lung, torn shoulder ligaments, torn bicep, 4 brain bleeds, stopped breathing on the track. I mean, that's incredible. Um, but we're gonna take a step back in time from that and work through the beginning of working out with Team USA. I mean, you were 19 at your first Olympics. That's is BMX a sport with that thrives with early sport specialization? I mean, are they all around your age at that time?
I mean, I was the youngest athlete in the games. And I think there's only ever been one person younger than me who made it. So no, it's not common, but it is an early sports specialization. Absolutely. It's similar to gymnastics, where if you start when you're 10, it's too late. All the athletes who end up making it to the highest level all started at 5, 6, 7 years old. Some even younger, 3, 4, and were able to, go on to be successful. Um, I think there's a couple of different things. You do have to have there's an amount of strength that is necessary. So, a 16-year-old is never going to be able to compete with a 24-year-old when it comes to the physical capabilities. So you have to develop the strength and the physical capabilities, but there also is an element of your frontal cortex or your frontal lobe does not fully develop until you're, a little bit older. And then you start looking at what you're doing, thinking, maybe this isn't the smartest thing to do. So like even at the end of my career or now, physically I'm stronger, I'm in better shape now than I was when I was 19, without a doubt. But I don't look at the sport the same way. I don't calculate risk the same way. And when I at the end of my career, when I was 28 years old and I was lined up next to a 20-year-old, and I'm sitting here and I've got a house payment and a family and other aspirations, and this 20-year-old is willing to die to win this race. Like, you start going into corners and thinking twice. You start looking at jumps and thinking twice, and as soon as that happens, that's when it's kind of at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I love bringing on extreme sport athletes onto this podcast because I do end up interviewing a fair amount of like the revenue building sports, like the footballs, the basketballs, the soccers. And you're not the first BMX racer I've had on this podcast. And I love talking to individuals who prioritize risk. I just think you guys have such an interesting perspective into the mental performance component of elite sport.
So, well, first off, I never prioritized risk. Risk just happened to be a part of what I enjoyed doing. And I guess I didn't really know anything different because I did it from such a young age. So I didn't know what it was like to do a sport where, you didn't have to think about getting a broken bone every time you did it. Um, with that being said, there's a really interesting book that I read called The Rise of Superman, and it's all about flow state and how action sport athletes have figured out how to enter flow state better than any group of people in the history of humankind, and how they studied big wave surfers and the mega ramp at the X Games, like different things where you quite literally die if you're off by an inch. And, not to say there's not pressure, you know, in baseball, bottom of the ninth, World Series pitcher, not to say there's not pressure to shoot a game winning shot for LeBron James, but if they miss it or make a mistake, they're not going to die. Whereas a big wave surfer puts a foot wrong, they could die. So they studied the ability of action sports athletes to shift into that flow state better, and they can do it better than anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I think that just send it mindset is so cool to
But
interview.
it's not, and that's where I got to stop you. It's not a send it mindset. You're not up there thinking, "Oh, screw it, I'm going." It's calculated. There's a lot of thought that's gone into it. There's a lot of preparation that's gone into it. And there is a piece of it certainly that you have to just send it because you're accepting the risk, right? When you do something like that, you are acknowledging that there is a chance of something bad happening, but you've accepted it because the controllables and what you feel comfortable with outweigh the uncontrollables.
Yeah. I mean, when you're 19, are you thinking about what you can control?
Not as much as you get older, just because you're not as mature or experienced. But from a coaching perspective, any good coach is really going to teach you to control your controllables, right? And especially in a sport that's an individual sport or even in a team sport. But like I competed against 7 other athletes every time I race. I can't control any of them. I can't do anything about any of them. All I can do is focus on my execution, my process, what I'm doing. Um, so I focus on my controllables. I can't do anything about the weather. I can't do anything about the course. I can't do anything um, about what the rider next to me is doing. So I got to focus on what I'm doing. And even in a scenario where it's a different action sport, let's say the mega ramp, for example, or an athlete doing a stunt, Evil Knievel style, they're only going to focus on the things that they can control. They cannot control anything else other than the machine that they're on or the piece of equipment that they're on, their preparation, their sleep the night before, what they do, their thought process. And that's part of what action sports athletes have to do. And I've talked to athletes from a range of different sports. You acknowledge the risk and you control your controllables. And at some point, the risk becomes too much for everyone. Everyone's always hit a point where the risk becomes too much. Not saying you are going to quit because of it, but maybe there's a stunt you don't want to do, or there's a day you don't want to compete, or the weather has just gotten too bad to where you don't want to go out there when you're in a hurricane. Uh, and it's a constant calculation running in your head.
Yeah. I mean, when you're the number 2 racer in the world and you go into the Olympics favored and you end up 7th of 8, what do you think went wrong?
Well, in that final moment, I was the number 1 seed in the final, so everything was perfect all the way up to the final. And I just made a classic young athlete mistake of getting ahead of myself. I was thinking about the after party instead of thinking about executing my start, and I wasn't focused on the process. I was already at the outcome. Um, I just picked the worst time to do it. But that was just a very standard mistake that I made at the wrong time.
And I had read in an article that you cited that 7th overall finish as kind of catapulting you into this mental health dilemma. Are you able to kind of talk through that?
Yeah. I mean, basically, to really simplify it, I was 19. I had just graduated from high school. I put all my eggs in this Olympic basket for the last 2, 3 years, doing everything I could, skipping prom, skipping hanging out with friends, really just locked in on this. And then it was all over. And now there's 4 years until the next one. And when you're 19, you don't have the capabilities to process that always. You don't have the understanding that like life is going to go on, whether you win or whether you lose. That, your self-worth is not just tied up in how you performed at the Olympics. But I was 19 and, I didn't know all those things. So I thought I was a failure and I thought I had wasted all my time. And I thought I'd let everybody around me down when everybody around me was proud of me. But I thought that everybody felt let down. And, um, it wasn't something where you get another try next week, next month, next year. Like you have to wait 4 years to maybe through an incredibly difficult process, possibly earn another chance. So, when that whole reality hits you of and it's a lot. And there's a lot of research that has shown that first time Olympians often struggle with the moment because there's just nothing like it. You could do any world championships, national championships that you want, but the Olympics is just on a completely different level. I guess the best way to explain it would be imagine like a high school football player all of a sudden going, from the high school Friday Night Lights to the Super Bowl. There's just nothing and no in between. Just go jump straight into the Super Bowl. And then you completely blow it. And then you got to wait 4 years to maybe try again and go back to Friday Night Lights for 4 more years. And like that's kind of what the Olympics is like for a lot of sports.
Yeah, I mean, I think this Paris Olympics was really fun because there were some athletes that were such young outliers and they were like parading their medals around and then like going back to high school.
And I almost think that it's easier when you're that young. Like there's like a sweet spot, before you're I don't know 19, 20 when like you don't even realize what it is. You don't know. And I guess the question for them will be what happens in the future because when you're starting your life at 15 years old going to the Olympics and then going back to high school, like where do you go from there? How do you manage that? Because that's going to be a period of time in your life, but eventually the Olympics and your career is going to end. And so how do you manage that when all you've ever known is that, and that's going to be a different dilemma for them. But yeah, I mean, credit to them. What a cool experience that would be to go into school and the teacher says, "How was your summer?" And you pull it out and you say, "Yeah, it was pretty good."
Yeah, I think was it Quincy Wilson who
The runner.
yeah, he tweeted, he was like, here's my Olympic medal and now I'm going back to high school.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's true. That's how it goes.
So then fast forward, I mean, four years later, you had broken your wrist for what, 4.5 months prior to Rio, and you were just going, this is my goal, and I'm gonna see it through even with a broken wrist.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously after what had happened, I had to wait 4 years, and it was something I thought about every day was the regret of not executing in that moment and how I wanted to fix it and how I really wanted to finish the job. And then when I broke the wrist, the timing wasn't ideal. It was April 1st. It was April Fool's Day. And I broke my wrist and, uh, it was devastating. And there was a period of time for a couple of months where I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to go. And then when I was given the chance to go, my wrist was still broken. I had to prove to the team that I was physically able to hold on in a ride. And, the doctor told me, he's like, legally, I can't clear you. You're not fixed, but, this is your call. Like I can't tell you what to do or what not to do. All I can do is recommend. And so I ended up riding with a broken wrist, and I wouldn't have done it for any other event. I wouldn't have done it for national or world championships or anything like that. But because it was the Olympics and because the alternative was to wait for another 4 years, I was like, look, I'm willing to risk permanent damage on my wrist for the, I guess, closing of this mental challenge that I had been facing for the last 4 years.
So, I mean, between London and Rio, were you working with the Team USA sports psychology staff?
Yep. Yeah. So that's one thing. I mean, we have amazing access to the Olympic team for sports psychologists, and I uh, I picked up the phone after the London Olympics, and I started working with them, and we basically began right there preparing for the Rio Games. Um, 4 years out, mentally preparing for it. And, that was another factor. Like, not only the physical work that I had done in the gym and at the track and on the trainer and all that, but the mental work that I had done, I didn't want all of it to go to waste. Look, there's other events, there's other things. Like, I won national championships and I won, a world championships in that 4 year period. But there's nothing like the Olympics trumps all of that. So that was what I was working towards.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of courage at 19 to get to that world stage and then to acknowledge that you need help outside of just physical conditioning is really admirable, especially that young. I mean,
Yeah,
like,
yeah. I mean, and I think I had good people around me, but I also think I recognized that I didn't lose because of my physical ability. Like, I didn't need to go lift more weights or do more starts. Like, I didn't lose because I wasn't fast enough. I lost because I didn't execute. I think part of being a good athlete, particularly in an individual sport, is you have to be real with yourself. You have to be able to identify your own strengths and weaknesses if you want to reach your maximum of your capabilities.
what do you think was the biggest thing that stood between that seventh place finish and then a gold medal 4 years later?
Focusing on the process and not the outcome on the race day. Like, the training and the physical side didn't really change much, but it was just that when I got to the second games or even any event after London, all my focus was on executing my process to the best of my ability and finishing the race knowing that I did my best. Versus in London, I had finished the race not feeling like I had done my best, but also, like, I vividly remember sitting there thinking about how cool it was going to be to win and how much money I was going to make and how fun the party was going to be and what I was going to eat. I wasn't thinking about what I actually needed to do. I mean, if you're a field goal kicker in football, right? Like, you're not sitting there to do the game winning kick, thinking about where you're going to go for dinner afterwards. You got to be thinking about making the kick. So I just learned that lesson the hard way, to stay present and stay focused on that step by step process. Um, and then that was really the main difference, just the approach and where I put my energy.
What was your favorite part of cultivating that mental health component of your game?
I think just the acknowledgement and willingness to work on it is the number one thing. And then just different conversations and techniques that I learned with my sports psychologist. And, we're talking about the sports side of this, but also simultaneously, like, I think about the growth and the experiences that a person goes through between 19 and 23. Yeah, that's a big change, right? And I moved out of my parents' house. I get my first girlfriend. I had my first heartbreak. Like, there, all the different things that you go through in that period, while also trying to be an elite athlete, traveling around the world by yourself in an individual sport without a team or a teammate to lean on. There's a lot going on.
Yeah. What, when you were looking at qualifying for Rio and then going to the finals, do you think you were prepared to win a gold?
I mean, I guess the obvious answer is yes. But I
What is it?
was I was going into that event 100% focused on leaving there. Like, this sounds silly, but my goal was, when I brush my teeth tonight and I look myself in the mirror, I want to be proud of the person that looks back at me and the effort that was put in. And if that means first, fifth, 10th, that's my only goal. Now, with that being said, I had the belief that my best was always capable of winning, right? And that doesn't mean that I was going to win every time, because there's a lot of other amazing athletes in any event that I'm participating in. But the goal in training is to practice and train and prepare well enough to where your best is enough to win. Like, that was always my goal. So I knew going into that event that if I executed to the best of my abilities, I had a shot to win. But if my best was only good enough for fifth, but I knew damn well that that was everything that I had, and I left nothing out there, then while I might not be excited, I wouldn't be full of regret. I would be like, shake their hand, say good job, go home and work harder. Um, so yeah, I mean, I guess with that being said, I was prepared to win because I was I was focused on the right thing that time.
It's so
And there
funny.
were other events, we're just, it's funny. Like I probably raced, and this is not an exaggeration, I probably raced 600 professional events throughout my career. Three of them were the Olympics, and those are the three that everybody always wants to talk about, right? But there was a lot of other events that happened in there too. Um, but there was a lot of events where I didn't necessarily win, but I rode, as best as I possibly could. I crushed it, and I got third. And I was so thrilled with that third because that third was every ounce of everything that I had, and um, I felt good about that. I had days where I won, but I rode sloppy and I made mistakes and I didn't feel great about it. Like, yeah, I won, that was the goal, but I didn't feel as good as some days where I had gotten a third. Um, so going into the big ones, the Olympics or World Championships, days like that, it was all about just feeling good about my efforts.
Yeah, I mean, how did your preparation for the World Championship golds differ from your preparation for the Olympics?
They don't, like, the physical preparation doesn't. The mental preparation you try not to, but the old adage is treat everything the same. But realistically, it's impossible. You know what it is, and I think it's like the acknowledgement of knowing that this is the Olympics or this is the World Championships, which is the world's is the biggest event in non-Olympic years. You do your best to try to approach it the same, but also understand that it's not. But every preparation is different because you come into every major event, with a different 12-month period in the lead up to it. Where are you at physically? Have you had any injuries? Is your back sore? What's going on in your personal life? Is your mom sick? Like there's always different factors every single time. Are you stressed out about this? Did your house burn down? Like there's always different stuff going on in your life, right? Like when people forget that athletes don't live in this little vacuum seal, they have a life too. So it's like I'm balancing my financial well-being. I'm balancing my family, right? Like I've got elderly grandparents too who are dealing with stuff. I've got a girlfriend. I've got a pet. I've got all the different things everybody has, while also trying to simultaneously deal with high pressure, high level sport. Um, where if I put a foot wrong, I could die. So like there's a lot of stuff going on. So every preparation was always a bit different.
Did you go in to Rio expecting to win? I mean, like, at what point in the race did you realize that you were going to come away with the gold?
No, I mean, going like on the flight to Rio, I thought I had a shot. I mean, I wasn't coming in with a great prep because I had a broken wrist and I had missed a bunch of time. I thought that if I did my best, I had a chance, and I thought that realistically I could get a medal. But in a sport like mine, we don't have lanes, we don't have walls between us. It's free for all. Anything could happen. There's a mechanical element. Flat tires happen. So I was like, if things go well, if I ride to the best of my abilities and a couple things break my way, I think I can medal. That was kind of where I was at. Um, and then in the finals, I was in second place out of the first corner, and um, I was behind somebody who I felt I had the ability to pass, but the ability to and executing it is two different things. So I would just was focused on getting by him, and it wasn't really until the very final corner that I kind of realized that I was going to win. Um, but I did a good job staying calm in that moment, and in that entire lap, staying calm and just focusing on where I was at and the process. Literally everything I worked on for 4 years came to light in that moment because I stayed so focused on what was right in front of me and in the process, and I never got ahead of myself.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said about those seconds where flow state just kicks in and you go, nothing else matters in this moment except being the best at what I'm trying to do. Now, whether that's the best compared to competitors or the best compared to what you think you can do, I mean, I think that that's interesting to look at as well. Like, what qualifies as the best? Is it a personal best or is it
Well, I think when
competition?
there's two different things to look at, right? There's the tangible ones of like a time or if you're a weightlifter, how much weight you lifted. And then there's, in a racing sport like ours, it's completely not intangible. Where my lap time that I had to win the gold medal was not the fastest lap time of the day because I was coming from behind. There were other laps that I ran that were quicker than the one that won me the gold medal. But it's like in that moment, in that race, every race evolves differently. Everything's going to be a little different. Did you execute to the best of your abilities? And only really you can answer that. Nobody else can answer that for you. And when you put your head in the pillow at night, you're always going to be the ultimate judge.
I mean, you were the first American to win an Olympic BMX gold medal. What did that mean to you in your like early 20s?
Yeah, I mean, it was hard to grasp, right? I was 23. So it was a lot. For me, I was really happy to win the gold medal for America just because this is a sport we invented and I felt like it was finally brought home. Um, it's one of those things where I think for the rest of my life, I will be able to fondly look back, smile, and you know, conquering that demon and doing something like that has really led to a lot of self confidence in other aspects of my life, knowing that I can work hard and overcome things and dedicate myself to a goal and achieve it. And with all that being said, if you're 23 years old and you're going to win the Olympics, not a bad place to live when you go home to Las Vegas. We had a good time.
I know I saw an interview that you had done, and you had basically said that exact quote. You're like, I was 23, I just won an Olympic medal, and I was going back to Vegas.
I had 2 months where, let's just say I don't really remember it.
So what happened between 2016 and then Tokyo? I mean, obviously COVID. How did COVID change the trajectory of your Olympic experience and also the world championships that were happening in that time, in that quad?
Well, I guess 17, 18, 19 was normal. And then in 2020, it was Olympic year. Everybody's going all in. You're doing all the training, all the build up. You've got a 4-year preparation mapped out, your periodized training plan, working towards it. Started off 2020 with the World Cup series. We had some World Cups in Australia. I won 2 of the 3 down there. I was on fire. Everything was going great. And then COVID, like 3 or 4 months before the Olympics was supposed to happen. Now, there's not really a playbook for what you do here because the Olympics has never been postponed before. And a lot of us in that time period were like, there's no way the Olympics is going to happen. This is quite literally exactly what they're saying we shouldn't do, which is get everybody from all over the world together in one place and then go home. So it was tough, right? Like trying to trick yourself into thinking that this event was going to happen because you have to keep working. You can't just take 6 months off. You have to keep working. Um, and like all the mental buildup that you had in 2019 and early 2020, kind of like building towards it, you had to stop, back up, and then start again. So it was tough. It wasn't easy. No major events in 2020, no world championships, and nothing really in 2021. And it was a weird time for sure. But eventually you get to the Olympics and everything is quote unquote normal. It's going on, but like no friends or family is allowed into the Olympics. Nobody's at any of the venues. You're racing in front of empty grandstands. The whole vibe of the Olympics is weird. You wake up in the morning, you take a COVID test first thing before you're allowed out of your room. Like the whole thing was just odd, not a fun experience. But I just kept reminding myself that at the end of the day, someone's going to win, and I did all this work, 5 years dedication, and I know how great it is to win a gold medal. I'm going to try to do it again.
And then you didn't.
Well, you missed the first day. The first day, the quarterfinal day, I crushed it. I won my quarterfinal, and I entered the second day, which was the semis and finals as the number 1 seed. And then the first semifinal and second semifinal were going, and I was leading my semifinal. I was already pretty much qualified for the finals. Everything was going great, and then freak accident happened, and I collided with a French rider, and I went down.
I mean, you were trying to do the exact same thing you had done 5 years earlier. You trained 5 years for it. And then just a freak collision. I mean, I watched the video. I saw how just fluky that was.
Had him or I been 1 inch further forward or backward, it would never have happened. It was like everything lined up for it to be a worst case scenario, but then also everything lined up for it to be a best case scenario to where you and I are sitting here having this conversation. Because if it was a little bit different, I could be dead, brain damaged, or something else. So for as bad as it was, it turned out okay.
Yeah, I mean, I watched the video. I watched the coverage of them putting you on a spine board. And then, I mean, broken ribs, collapsed lung, torn shoulder ligaments, torn bicep, 4 brain bleeds. It's a miracle that you are here right now.
It sounds weird, but like the broken ribs, collapsed lung, torn ligament stuff, like that's almost like nothing. That nobody cared about that at the time. Like we didn't even realize that I had done that for a couple of months because it was all the head injury. That was the big one. I mean, I stopped breathing. I don't know if you can see it on your angle of the video, but I've seen video where like I'm intubated, like there's a breathing tube down my throat because I'm not breathing. Obviously, head injury and breathing; those are the two main concerns. And you know, brain was swollen, trying to make sure my brain's not bleeding. Survival is the first step. And then from there, once you're sure I'm going to survive, is he even going to remember who he is whenever he wakes up?
I said, obviously, the broadcast did not show you being intubated on the track. I mean, your family wasn't there.
No, I mean, it was horrible for them. I mean, they saw it happen. And then from there, they were just trying to get information. The information was spotty. Nobody was allowed in the hospital. It was COVID, so nobody's allowed in the hospital. They're trying to figure out if they can come over to Japan. It went all the way up the chain to the U.S. ambassador of Japan. The ultimate answer was no. So then I feel bad for what I put them through, but they had to basically sit around for a few days, hoping that they would hear news that their son was going to wake up.
Yeah, I mean, I saw TBI and you were in a coma for 5 days. And I mean, they weren't getting any news. I mean, you were in a coma, right?
There was no news. Just we gotta wait for him to wake up. The doctors put the phone by my bed, and then hoped that whenever I woke up, I would reach out, and that's what happened. I woke up, saw my phone, 500 text messages, everybody I've ever met, you know, every major news outlet worldwide, ABC, NBC, CBC, ESPN, Fox, CNN, like who you name it, with some article about me. And then from there, I called my mom, and then she called the doctor. The doctor came, and then that was when they began assessing to see, where I was at and how I was.
I mean, when you wake up after 5 days in a coma in a Japanese hospital and you don't speak the language, I mean, that must be so strange.
Yeah, the whole thing was weird. I mean, then you add in that you feel terrible too, right? And I could only stay awake for a few minutes at a time. But yeah, it was not an enjoyable experience. 0 out of 10 recommend.
I think it's interesting. I can't remember what news article, like who wrote the article, but your mom had been quoted as saying that she did not expect you to curse as much as you did.
So the part of the brain that I hurt was your frontal lobe, which essentially is your inhibition and like your filter, I guess is the best way to put it. It's like, you have that crazy thought when you're walking down the street of like, oh, I'm gonna steal somebody's purse, but then like that piece of your brain is what tells you not to do that. That piece was injured. So I said whatever I thought. Like imagine if you just blurted out whatever thought came first to your mind all the time with no thought behind it, you get yourself into trouble, right? Like, oh, that's a horrible shirt. Oh, that lady's ugly. Oh, this food sucks. Like, if you said that every time, like, that's what I did. And so I just was, person left and right, saying things I shouldn't say to people I shouldn't say them to, but it was just part of the injury. And eventually, thankfully that filter turned back on.
I, in the same YouTube short that you had mentioned all of the injuries, you had also mentioned that when you're waking up from a coma, they try to get someone that you know to make sure that you recognize them.
Do
I
you mind
mean,
repeating that? You cut out again.
what's up?
I said you cut out again. Do you mind repeating
Oh,
that?
sorry. You had been quoted as saying that when you wake up from a coma, the hospital or the doctors, I'm not sure exactly who it was, but they require someone to be there to make sure that you can recognize them.
Okay, so yeah, so when you're waking up from a head injury, it's not like a bone where I can go X-ray it and you can see how badly it's broken. You don't really know what's going on. So one of the best things that you could do is you can see if you recognize somebody that you should recognize. And then that person who knows you can kind of report back to the doctors, yes, he's acting normal. No, he's not acting normal. Um, because when you have a traumatic brain injury, a head injury, brain bleeds, it's not like a concussion where maybe like, light is going to be sensitive for a couple of days, maybe your brain foggy for a few days. I mean, you might have a piece of your brain that straight up is broken, doesn't work. Um, so yeah, when I woke up, there was nobody really around who I knew. So they didn't really have anybody to kind of be like, yeah, he's acting normal. No, he's not acting normal. And so they needed to find and bring somebody in. Because think about it, all the BMX people were gone because my event ended days ago. So they got somebody in, and I was like, and I immediately was like, hey, like I recognized him, and that was like the first good sign. So
I mean, who was that person?
he was the guy who ran travel and logistics for the cycling team, and I had worked with him for like 10 plus years.
So that was a complete coincidence that you knew anyone that was still there.
Well, I mean, there was other events going on still, like BMX was done, but other cycling events were still going on. So there were still people in the cycling, uh, I guess, faction of the Olympics that were still there. So he and then somebody else who was like a director within the cycling program who I knew were able to come in and check in with me.
That's incredible. I mean, what were your what was your family like? How was your family dealing with you being in a Japanese hospital and there being unable to talk to you or be by your bedside?
I mean, you have to ask them more than me. I think they were just happy that I was awake and that I was getting positive feedback and that it was looking like it was trending in the right direction. I think it was definitely a really hard time for them not having the ability to be there. Um, but I imagine that they just were, every time they got good news, he's awake. He recognized this person. I could call them. Um, those are all good signs.
I saw that you had mentioned somewhere on your website, you had joked that you have a PhD in BMX because you've been in the sport for so long. I think that
Mhm.
that's such a fun way of describing a life committed to sport excellence.
Yeah, I mean, I think I actually got that from somebody else, and he said, "Look, I feel like I have to give back to the sport because I've been around so long and I know it better than 99.9% people on this earth. And truthfully, for me personally, I would say there might be 10 to 15 people on this planet that know the sport as well as I do, and I know it from all different aspects, whether it's as an athlete, as a sponsor, from the marketing side, the industry side, the financial side. Like I just have this holistic experience within this one tiny little niche. And so, I wish I had a PhD in, something that paid better, right? Like maybe a heart surgeon or something. That'd be nice. But I have a PhD in this particular topic, so it'd be a waste to not use it.
How did that acknowledgement turn you toward coaching other people?
I've been coaching since I was young. So that's a very common thing Olympians do in smaller sports like mine to fund their way to continue training is through coaching. So I started coaching younger athletes when I was like 19 years old. And I've done some coaching throughout that whole process. And really, I've had a lot of great coaches myself, but I know my lane. I'm not a strength and conditioning coach. I cannot, go too into detail. I know the basics, but I can't go too into detail in the gym. I don't have a kinesiology degree or anything like that. But if you want to talk about bike technique, bike setup, race tactics, strategy, that kind of stuff, you'll be hard pressed to find anybody in the world who knows more than me about that. So let's talk about that.
I mean, I saw that once you officially retired from BMX, the USOPC does a pretty good job of maintaining their resources after you retire. I mean, you
Yeah.
you have been cited as saying that you use the mental health resources, but like as a whole, do you feel like the USOPC did a good job with you once you left your sport?
Yeah, for sure. And that's something I know that they're very dedicated to doing is continuing to help athletes afterwards. There's a lot of resources during as well, but when you're competing, a lot of athletes don't look at those resources because they're so laser focused on what they're doing. So to still have the continued access to some of those resources post retirement, I think is wonderful. And then from there, I've watched the shift because I was around the Olympic movement from 2010 is when I first made the national team all the way through 2023 when I officially retired, 22 when I officially retired, a period of 12 years. I watched the shift where, mental health really got moved to the forefront and you got more access and more resources were put to that. And they, continue to add and offer more resources for athletes. I myself got about half of my college education paid for from the United States Olympic team. um, very thankful for the resources that they had, and also that I made the effort to take advantage of them because I don't know if all the athletes do.
Yeah, I mean, what is the lifespan of a BMX rider? Their career, not
It's
their
all different.
life.
I mean, I was able to be at the highest level for over a decade, so I'm going to be on the long side. I've seen riders go as long as 13, 14 years. I've seen some riders just be a flash in the pan for a year or two, and everything in between. And the BMX racing has been in the Olympics for 5 games now, 2008 through 2024, and there's been a total of 9 men who have gone to the Olympics for Team USA through that 20-year period. So, not very many are going to do it. Um, those who did go, I went to 3, another guy went to 2, another guy went to 2, some went to 1. So, it could be anywhere from 4 years to 12.
Yeah. I mean, when you decided to retire, did you have any intent to remain in the sport? I mean, I saw that you had, once you rehabbed from your whole Tokyo experience, you tried to get back on the bike.
Yeah, so look, I didn't want to make a rash decision. I mean, I was 15 minutes away from contending for my second Olympic gold medal. And, I won one of them, but the 2 that I didn't win at the games I was at, I was the number 1 seed in the final in London, and for all intents and purposes, had the ability to win. Then I won my second one, and then the third one, I was 15 minutes away from trying to win again. And so, to walk away and have that be the last thing that you did as an athlete, you spent 5 years, you dedicated everything. All right, now I've done this rehab, I'm healthy again. There's only 2 years till Paris. That's not that long. Do I want to try to finish this out the right way and like go off with my head held high versus on a bodyboard? So I didn't want to make a rash decision. I committed to doing a little training and thinking about it a little bit. And, it came pretty quickly once I started training that I just didn't want to. Well, obviously, there was the risk of injury and the fear that I didn't want to hurt myself again. But more than anything, I just didn't want to. I didn't want every moment of my day for the next couple of years to be dedicated to trying to win the Olympics again, because that is the level of dedication you have to have. I had other interests. I had other things. And the fact that I even had to think twice, that was it. I knew I was done. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to contend with these 22-year-old kids who had never been to a games and were going to give everything in their ability to possibly make it.
That's a significant amount of maturity that conversation with yourself and your support staff must have taken.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the maturity just comes from the experiences that I've had, the highest of highs, the lowest of lows. And I mean, 19-year-old me wouldn't have been able to have that. 23-year-old me wouldn't have been able to have that. But when you add in all the ingredients and everything that comes together to get to that end point, that was where I was at. And it wasn't easy. I mean, there's the natural competitor in me. I mean, look, you don't win the Olympics without having a bit of a ridiculous competitive mindset, right? Like I look at this and I think to myself, I only won one gold medal. I should have won more, right? Or like I only went to 3 Olympics. I should have went to 4. Um, I'm going to go down as one of the greatest of all time, not the greatest of all time, right? Like there's that, you don't get to that level without having that weird, crazy mindset that's a little bit off. But I also, acknowledge that and can recognize that and can kind of laugh now. Like, come on, dude. Like, you're going to complain that you only went to 3 Olympics? Come on.
What was it about coming back to Paris in a different role that
It was
made
fun.
you want to become like maintain your involvement in the sport?
Well, I mean, I never stopped my involvement. Like, even when I retired, and immediately I was still involved in the sport. But having the opportunity to commentate for NBC for Paris was a blast. Again, with the PhD, like I can talk about this. It's as easy as me saying my ABCs and pointing out things that I'm going to see or what's going to happen. And it was a lot of fun, and I hope to do more of it. Um, but it was great because I was able to enjoy the sport and enjoy the Olympics from a completely different perspective. And I'm a whole new respect for the broadcast team and the athletes, because when you're in it, you have your blinders on, you're focused so forward on what you're doing. But now I'm able to sit back, relax, and enjoy it from a different point of view.
I think it's cool when I talk to athletes who are at the peak of their athletic performance and then they leave their sport for whatever reason. And then they get into a different part of the production of their sport. So like you went from an athlete to an analyst, some go from athlete to coach. I think the continued involvement in your sport is really cool because you're able to just move on to a different phase of your relationship with that sport.
Yeah, exactly. And I get to, like I said, that with the PhD, I've done all these different pieces of the sport. Been the analyst, been the coach, been the rider. I've sponsored riders. I've been sponsored. I have done all these different pieces of it, which adds this really holistic view and knowledge of the sport. And it's been fun to enjoy it in different pieces now. Whereas when I was an athlete, I was only enjoying that piece.
Do you think that being removed from competition has changed your relationship with the sport?
I guess you would say so, because when I was with the sport, like the blinders were on. I was just trying to win. Um, I didn't care about a lot of the things that maybe I would care about now, whereas I only cared about winning, which kind of have to be at that level or be like that to be at that level. Whereas now I get to think about the kid who's getting exposed to the sport and is going to love the sport and is going to make his new best friends in the sport. And he's going to ride for 3 years and then he's going to move on and play football, or whatever it may be. But I get to enjoy it and look at it from a different perspective now. Whereas before it was, what is my max squat right now? What is my start time? What am I eating for dinner? Have I taken my supplements today? Like it's a very specific role that I had focused on for most of my life.
So what comes next?
All these different pieces. I mean, I'm doing a lot now, so I'm still very involved in the sport. Like we've been talking about, analyst. I'm an ambassador for USA BMX. I coach. I've got brand ambassador deals. I sponsor athletes. Like all these different pieces here. I'm a keynote speaker. I go around the country and speak on my story and peak performance. And obviously, having won the Olympics and nearly died at the Olympics is quite a variety. You learn a lot. So packaging and taking the things that I've learned and teaching other people things that they can use in their life with it is very enjoyable. I host a TV show for PBS, which is really fun. And yeah, and just being thankful every day to be alive because I almost wasn't.
What is the demographic that seeks you out as a keynote speaker? Are
I've
they
spoken for all
sports?
sorts of different things. So, the things that I really speak on: peak performance, mental health, resilience, inspiration. I mean, these are universal things that almost anybody can use. So I do a lot of kickoffs for like sales teams. I've done a lot of real estate stuff. I've spoken to mastermind groups. I've spoken to medical device sales teams. I've done uh, charity events, fundraisers. Just last week I did something for a charter school. They have 400 teachers, and talking about how important the decisions and the goals that they set for their classroom and how they impact multiple 30, 40, 50 students a year. So it's a wide variety, and it's been a lot of fun. I spoke probably the most nerve wracking one I did. I did one for the Raiderettes, the cheerleaders for the Las Vegas Raiders, my local football team, and it was me and 30 very pretty women in a room, and I had to stay focused and do my job, which I did. But it was a really fun one, really challenging one too.
I mean, when you're looking at a sport where a split-second decision changes everything, what other facets of life is that kind of decision making applicable to?
Really anything. So I'll share a piece of my keynote that I think is will answer your question. So I talk about in my keynote how when you're an Olympic athlete or if you're a professional athlete, you're on the job 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And everything that you do counts and everything you do matters. If after practice you decide to go get a cheeseburger, fries, and a milkshake, that's going to affect your recovery, and therefore it's going to affect your performance the next day at practice. And even if it's only a couple percent, it affects it. And then that bad practice can affect the next thing, can affect the next thing, right? If it's Friday night, you decide to go out, have a few drinks, you stay out late, right? That affects your sleep cycle, your recovery, your energy levels. If you have alcohol, that affects your recovery again, your energy levels, right? And therefore your practice the next day, the next day, the next day, you're going to be in a sleep deprivation. You're going to be trying to, work back from that. And then what I explain is that it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what goal you've set. You too are on the clock 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. All the decisions, no matter how seemingly small they might be, matter. Now, uh, deprivation is not always optimization, right? I'm not saying to be a robot and never have fun. Like I had cheeseburgers and I went out, but there was always a thought process as to when and why. Okay, I don't have any events for the next 3 months. Now's a good time to do that. And I'm always double checking, does this make sense? So every decision is made with intent, and every decision is made, with the thought process of the goal ultimately in mind. And I think that that's something that anybody can use, anybody can apply to their life. Just put a little more thought into their decisions and watch how it affects the outcome of their work, whatever it is that they do.
How do you decide which string to pull, which variable to shift in order to attempt to optimize your performance?
I am an overthinker, which is a blessing and a curse. And so when presented with a decision, I think through best case, worst case, most likely case, and I kind of weigh those options, and then I make my decision. I'm jealous of people who can just go with the flow, make a decision, not think twice. Like I think everything through always.
Yeah, I am always very jealous of people who can just decide to do something.
Yeah,
I am definitely like you in that way. I overanalyze everything.
yeah.
But I feel like that's just like
Blessing and a curse.
the competitive mindset, like you're always analyzing if you can succeed in
Yep.
whatever situation it is.
Blessing and a curse.
My questions have concluded. Is there anything else that you think that I missed about telling your story? Any additional information? Anything that you'd like to clear up? The floor is yours.
No, I think I'm good. I think it's you got most of the main stuff with the racing side of things, and what I'm up to now, and yeah, it should be good. If anybody listening needs a keynote speaker, feel free to reach out to my website, connorfields.com, and there's a contact form on there, and Bonus points if you're in Nashville, because I love Nashville where you are. So if I
Yeah,
get to come out there, any reason to come out there is a good reason.
Nashville is the best. Let me figure out when your episode will be. And if anything changes between now and then, just shoot me an email. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I think that your story is one of maximum resilience. And I love talking to athletes who have gone through a massive life-changing situation, because you could interview two athletes with exactly the same situation, two exactly similar ACL tears, and they could have a completely different year of rehab. Would you ever get back into the sport in a different capacity, like just casually?
Like riding, racing? No. People ask me that all the time, and I don't usually say this publicly, but like, why would I work just as hard and take just as much risk to do less than I used to do? Like, I've won the Olympics. What am I going to go do? Some like casual weekend warrior race? Like, all my competitive juices are out to go, and like, I don't need to go do something less um, than I used. I don't have no desire.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you are at the peak of your career, you're the best in the world. Where do you even go from there? Like,
Yeah, exactly. There's nowhere else to go. So that's why I feel satisfied and done. Question for you. So
answer
you
for
do
you.
this podcast. Is this your full-time thing, or do you have a
Yeah, so we're almost at 100 episodes of this podcast, and I have some awesome sponsors. So BetterHelp is a sponsor, KT Tape is a sponsor. I also have an audiobook company that sponsors the storytelling that I do, which is really cool. I do a lot of freelance as well. So like I work for all the major sports networks as a videographer for the
oh wow,
broadcasts.
cool.
Yeah, so I hesitate to say full-time job because I freelance. I don't belong to anyone, which is really cool. But that is what I do a lot of the time when I'm not doing interviews like this. But we are at almost 100 episodes, and I have some really awesome sponsors who believe in the storytelling that I'm doing. And
Cool.
it's cool to get to talk to people like you and put out the most incredible stories. I mean, I just interviewed, this is like hot goss because the episode's not coming out until December, but I just interviewed an athlete from my seventh country, um, like team sport athlete, national team athlete. He ran track for Team Barbados, but Barbados is the seventh country that I've had an athlete on from, which
Cool.
is it's really cool to see the difference in how national teams support their athletes. I mean, the US
Totally.
OPC, I've heard such amazing things about their treatment of you guys when you're competing and then also post competition. It's really not like that elsewhere.
No, yeah, there's the whole. I've met people from all over the world. It's the whole gamut, the whole range. You have even better. I've heard some that are even better. I've heard a lot more that are way worse. So,
Yeah, I mean, I interviewed a track athlete from Team Peru, and the Peruvian Olympic Committee literally doesn't even really support them at all. Like, these athletes don't even matter unless they are in like the top two in the country.
yeah,
Like, they don't
yeah,
even get to go to the Olympics if they're number three.
that's crazy. Awesome. Well, hey, good
Yeah.
times. Let me know
Yeah.
if you need anything else from me, and
Yeah, for
keep
sure.
me posted about when it's going to go live.
Yep. Next week.
Cool. Thanks. See ya.
Thank you, Connor.